Good morning. Welcome to Rising. We have another fantastic Wednesday show planned for you today. Brianna, what are we getting into?
Well, we'll, of course, be digging into all of the House Speaker chaos as the Kevin McCarthy kerfuffle embarrassingly fails to whip votes for the speakership multiple times last night. Joining us to get into all of it will be former Representative Justin Amash. You won't want to miss that interview. But first, journalist Matt Taibbi dropped a new round of the Twitter files yesterday afternoon. Got a little lost in the fray, perhaps. He reports that once Twitter began, quote, rolling over for Congress in 2017, the ending was inevitable, a former surrender to the intelligence community on content moderation.
Now, after facing growing public pressure from Democratic politicians to address alleged Russian bots on the platform, in 2017, Twitter executives created a Russia task force, which showed of the 2,500 full manual account reviews, 32 suspicious accounts were identified, and only 17 of those were in any way connected to Russia, and they weren't even sure they were part of the Russian government misinformation campaign. Even as Twitter prepared to change its ad policy and remove those accounts, which included RT and Sputnik, to appease members of Congress, members of the Senate Intelligence Committee turned the heat up even more, reportedly leaking the larger base list of 2,700 accounts, along with other information, to the mainstream media.
Later in 2020, the State Department would do the same by leaking a report named Russian Disinformation Apparatus Taking Advantage of Coronavirus Concerns. The report identified specific accounts which the government identified as problematic, including one which speculated about lab origins of COVID. As 2020 progressed, requests to suspend undesired accounts began to escalate from all over, from the Treasury Department, the NSA, virtually every state, the Department of Housing and Human Services, the FBI, and even DHS.
They also received an astonishing variety of requests from officials asking for individuals they didn't like to be banned. Here, the Office for Democrat and House Intel Committee Chief Adam Schiff asked Twitter to ban journalist Paul Sperry. Taibbi concludes it all led to the situation described by Michael Schellenberger 2 weeks ago, in which Twitter was paid $3 million essentially for being an overwhelmed subcontractor. Quote, Twitter wasn't just paid for the amount of work they did for government, they were underpaid, according to Taibbi. So this is more really interesting stuff from the Twitter files. And I have a couple takeaways, one being, I think, Yoel Roth, the Twitter executive who was much maligned in the earlier dispatches, has kind of been wrongly thrown under the bus. I've now seen enough communications between law enforcement and Yoel Roth and other employees where it's clear he's pushing back. It's clear he's frustrated with what the intelligence community is asking. It's clear he's calling BS on it. And several times he's saying, you're saying these are all Russian accounts affiliated with the effort to undermine our elections or the U.S. We're saying, no, they're not. We have no evidence of that. They're just like, and nobody's seeing this content. It doesn't matter. Stop. What are you talking about? That's what Twitter is saying to the government. And then the government steps it up and says, okay, you're not going to take this seriously? Well, we have some friends at Politico and other journalist outlets who would love to hear about how social media companies are not doing much to preserve the integrity of our elections. How does that sound?
Yeah, that's one of the craziest parts of this, that coercive aspect of it, where they were using kind of discontent they could gin up in the media to put the target on some of these companies that up until that point hadn't really been scrutinized, or for which there had been no real proof that they had been doing anything wrong. But once you get a couple articles written about how maybe there's
are useful idiots in the press. I'm using that ironically now. They're saying, Russia. Any connection to Russia is just enough. You just have to print the word Russia. Russia, Facebook, Russia, Twitter. Very bad.
Yeah. And I'm really glad you said that, because, some of us have been saying since the beginning, it's not that when we're any heroes of these tech companies, they do plenty that is wrong. But it seems kind of evident from the beginning, these are not ideological decisions oftentimes that are being made. They are being pushed to make ideological decisions by ideological partisans. But these are businesses, tech companies, who just want to have limited liability. They want to go about their business. They don't want to get caught up in all of this. They just want to make money. So there's a conversation to be had about protecting them from political influence. There's a conversation to be had about whether or not, because of the ideological priors of the people who work there, they're more or less likely to go along with certain political projects than others. I think that's all perfectly fair. But the fundamental issue here is that the government keeps trying to influence these companies. And you see over and over again, we were just talking about this during break, companies like Facebook proposing changes to their policy, like doing end-to-end encryption, not especially because they care about the welfare, safety, and privacy of users, but because they want to be able to plausibly say to law enforcement officials, hey, I can't actually turn over these emails. Hey, I can't actually turn over these messages. Hey, I can't actually rat on the woman who tried to order the abortion pill over the web. I don't want to be involved in these political debates at all. I want to be used by a diverse constituency of people across the world and just make money. So we got to get to the root of the problem and stop trying to act like, as much as they're problematic, these figureheads like Jack or Zuckerberg or whomever are the root of the problem.
Yes, and we should mention the legislative part of the push as well. So they're getting pressure from law enforcement, from the FBI, from government intelligence services, who are then leaking to the media to put additional pressure, the negative publicity, at a time when they're preparing to be, the legislature, Dems, Republicans too, they're preparing to drag them before Congress. I believe it was Senator Mark Warner was the one who was mentioned in this batch of Twitter files. I'd have to double check who it was. But a prominent Democratic senator who is just inveighing over and over again against Twitter because of the Russia connection, because of the safety of our elections, and being very explicit about, well, this is why we need new regulation. This is why this is not good enough. This is why you can't just be allowed to do your own thing, because you're allowing all this Russian propaganda. What he's saying is false. It's not true. Those things are not connected to Russia. It had very little effect on election. It's not even necessarily illegitimate. Like, they're allowed to say what they think, and the extent to which it's like mind control from Russia is just so overstated. It's comical at this point, and I'm not saying anything you don't know or our audience doesn't know. We've talked about it a lot, but that's what the Democrats in Congress were saying, that the intelligence officials, so they're threatening that. The intelligence officials are saying, well, here's the people you need to take down, and we're going to smear you in the media, which will then add more additional fuel to the fire for the Congress creating a firestorm over this. You see why eventually, over time, they just start saying, okay, what do you want us to take down? Fine.
Yeah.
What's next? Fine.
Yeah.
And then they're overwhelmed with requests. Yeah, and then they're doing little else.
The legal aspect of this, as someone who did practice corporate law for 7 years and knows that most of my workload was reviewing documents, like, I understand the optics of Twitter taking money to do these tasks, and there are some perverse incentives there. At the same time, that is literally why so many law firms are getting paid point blank, period. Their entire job is reviewing documents, and they basically made Twitter do the exact same kind of internal review. That is the sum total of what law firm work actually is. So I'm not surprised that it's an incredibly time-consuming process. It's an incredibly expensive process. It's a detail-oriented process that you can't really punt to juniors very easily. And they were really put in quite the bind. If the government is going to require that kind of review, they either have to take it upon themselves or compensate people for it. And this is the last piece of this puzzle, and I mentioned this yesterday. I do think that there is value in reviewing all of these documents, and it is putting a high burden on the folks who are administering the Twitter files to be just a small handful of journalists, 3, 4, 5 people who are doing that and overlooking what must be hundreds of thousands of pages of emails over the course of the year. Mm-hmm. So I really do hope at some point there is a choice to open up this catalog the same way that we had access to the Podesta files and were able to see all sorts of machinations going on with Hillary Clinton in 2016 and efforts to influence the press. It seems like there's a much more sophisticated operation going on at this point because of the influence of social media, and it is terrifying to think where this could go next if we don't put the kibosh on it and there isn't some real response to what these Twitter files have revealed now. I
would love to ask Yoel Roth or someone who was in a position like him, if they could do it again, what would they do differently? Would maybe they would say, we would tell the FBI to go to hell. Yeah. We would say, screw all you.
Or whistleblow. Maybe they would leak the emails and get this all over with a long time ago.
But they probably assumed a greater degree of competence on the part of law enforcement officials than was warranted. That's a lesson Republicans have had to learn. That's a lesson everybody has to learn. While we're still anxiously awaiting the release of the Fauci files, which Elon Musk teased last week, Rising host Batya Ungar Sargon spoke to Fox Business about the upcoming drop. Let's watch that.
I definitely want to know more about the ways in which Twitter and Dr. Fauci intersected. I think there was a lot of misdirection, a lot of very bad advice coming out of Dr. Fauci's office, and I think that there was a real failure of introspection. So I'm looking forward to seeing what was there. I do have to say, I find it very interesting that Elon Musk is not more interested in where COVID came from. He's not more interested in China's role in this pandemic that killed millions and millions and millions of Americans. For all of his tweeting and all of this, disclose this, disclose that, he never accidentally says anything negative about the CCP. And we know that that's because his entire supply chain is in China. And so he is very careful not to offend China. And I think that really weakens his position as, this moral arbiter of truth and free speech and so forth.
Yeah, I'm glad Batya keeps making that point.
It's a solid argument. Look, I've noticed a trend, Robbie, where if we do a segment that is at all critical of Elon Musk, just reporting on the fact of his Tesla stock price going down, some ideological inconsistencies with the way that he's been pursuing this free speech absolutist approach on the platform, a lot of folks in our audience aren't big fans. They don't really like it.
I've noticed that.
Yeah, they don't respond well in the comments, and they don't tend to even click on articles that kind of signal out front, we're going to say something kind of negative about Elon Musk. But I think it's important because, like it or not, the principles that he was articulating, I think, were good ones, and ones that I think a lot of folks on the left could get behind. The fact of the censorship of accounts, we know hurt the left as well. When we're talking about Russiagate and who it hurt, we know that Bernie Sanders was accused of having Russia at his back when he won the Nevada primary because it was such a threat to the Democratic establishment. Probably you as well, have been called a Putin puppet more times than I could count. I'm practically going to get the tattoo at this point. So, these things were important to pursue, and that's why I think it is so important for people like Batya to be raising these inconsistencies and say, if you really care about these principles, don't sully them by basically prioritizing your personal economic interests over what should be legitimate free speech concerns that should extend to your manufacturing, the home of your manufacturing enterprises in China as well.
Well, I think we're going to hear more on that subject from Batya later this week, and we'll have more Rising right after this. Stay with us.